Biblically Centered Kids.
Hello and happy Saturday, everybody out there. Happy Saturday, friends. Hope you are having a great weekend so far. Today is Saturday, October 19th, 2024. My name is Mr. Johnny, and I want to welcome you here to the Biblically Centered Kids podcast. Surely by this point, you've already got the virtue of this week memorized, right? Come on, we do this every Saturday, all right? Okay, well, if you have it, go ahead and say it out loud. Virtue P says... Did you remember it? All right, let's say it all together. Virtue P says, we practice using our gifts and talents with diligence and purpose. Great job, everybody. You guys are doing a fantastic job on having that memorized this week. And like I said before, today is Saturday, and I think Saturdays are a great day to play a game. Today we're going to play a fun game we haven't played in a long time called Guess the Decade. Cue the music. All right, today we're going to play a fun game called Guess the Decade. Anyone out there history buffs? Well, throughout our history, there have been plenty of trends that have come and gone. In this game, I'm going to ask a question, and you need to see if you can guess the decade I'm referring to. So, as an example, if I were to say, what decade did tie-dye shirts become popular? What would you guess that would be? Well, if you guessed the 1970s, you would be correct. Now, this is a light and fun game, and maybe you'll learn a little bit along the way. See if a sibling or a parent will play along with you. Are you ready?
Yeah!
All right, let's jump into the Biblically Centered Time Machine and take a trip across the decades. All right, question 1. You may need to ask your parents about this one. I'm sure you kids are somewhat familiar with the Nintendo Switch, right? Back in the day, we didn't have a video game system like that. But Nintendo did have something called a Game Boy, which was all the rage. It was a portable game console with very simple graphics, and it wasn't even backlit, meaning you couldn't play it in the dark. So we've definitely come a long way, but the question is, what decade was the first Game Boy introduced? It was the 1980s. All right, question 2. Another one you might need to ask a grown-up about. Now, a lot of us stream our music and can listen to anything we want through our AirPods, right? But back in the day, they had these things called cassette tapes. The company Sony invented the first Sony Walkman, which allowed you to listen to music on the go. In what decade did they invent this? It was the 1970s. All right, any history buffs out there? In which decade did World War II end? The 1940s. All right, question 4. Have you ever needed the answer to something and had to have your parents search for it on Google? Well, this may blow your minds, but Google hasn't always been around. In which decade was Google first released? The 1990s. All right, question 5. I know we've been talking about video games some. Have any of you kids played the game Pac-Man before? It's that iconic yellow face that chomps its way through mazes all while trying to avoid being captured by those pesky ghosts. Well, which decade did the first Pac-Man arcade game get released? The 1980s. All right, question 6. Any future astronauts listening on this episode? Oh, okay, cool. Figured there'd be a few of you. Well, let's see how well you know your space history. Which decade was the first satellite launched into space? Was the 1950s. All right, question 7. Any Beatles fans out there in your house? Well, what decade did the Beatles break up? The 1970s. And yes, we are big Beatles fans in my house. Question 8. Such a classic toy, Mr. Potato Head. You know Mr. Potato Head from Toy Story? Well, he's an actual toy. I'm sure you've played with one before. What decade was Mr. Potato Head released? The 1980s. All right, question 9. Motorola introduced the first mobile phone in which decade? Yes, that's right. You know how your parents have those phones they can carry on them? Yeah, that hasn't always been the thing. Sometimes I think it was better when we couldn't be reached 24/7, but that's a different topic. All right, when did the first mobile phone get introduced? It was the 1980s. All right, question 10. We all love our microwaves, right? Yeah, they haven't always been around, but what decade were they invented? Microwaves were first invented in the 1940s. That might have been a little further back than someone might have guessed, right? All right, question 11. All right, this is a throwback. Anyone out there know what a Cabbage Patch Kid doll is? Well, what decade were they invented? The 1980s. Man, the 80s were a pretty great decade for toys. All right, question 12. Any Star Wars fans? What decade was the first Star Wars movie released? The 1970s, and they changed the scope of cinema forever. All right, number 13. What decade did C.S. Lewis write the Chronicles of Narnia series? The 1950s. Have any of you read these books? They're great. All right, 14. And I think this is our last one. In which decade was jazz introduced? Anyone out there listen to jazz music? It's a great genre. It blends African American and European musical traditions. It was first introduced in the 1920s, and still to this day, it is such a respected and challenging musical genre. Some great musicians all around the world love and play jazz music. All right, well, good job today guessing those decades. I hope you learned a little bit along the way on this beautiful Saturday. And I hope you're having some pleasant fall weather where you live and it hasn't been too cold yet. Does anyone out there enjoy raking leaves? Believe it or not, my kids love to, and they often request to go outside and rake. It's pretty bizarre, but hey, I like letting them do it because that's a task I don't have to do, right? All right, well, enjoy your Saturday, and tomorrow Miss Danika is going to be leading us in a draw along, so we'll see you right here tomorrow. Until next time.